But to be clear, the Jesus movement didn't just stand in opposition to certain elements of Roman culture. It also reinforced a few things as well. It reinforced the idea of communal justice, something that I'd like you to look for as you read the passages from Mark that I have assigned. The Jesus movement reinforced attitudes about who deserved care, a piece that I would also like you to look for as you read the passages from the Gospel of Mark that you are assigned. See how this all works together? The Jesus movement reinforced the moral authority, and I would add the dignity of the oppressed and those who are suffering, and you'll see this very clearly in the, guess what, passages from Mark that I have assigned. The Jesus movement also reinforced hope in a just deity, a God who would make or respond to the pleas of people in a way that was rational and not in an arbitrary fashion. And then finally, and perhaps most provocatively, the Jesus movement reinforced patterns of bodily suffering that were modeled after a late leader. And by late leader, I'm referring here to Jesus, who continued in living relationship with the group beyond that leader's death. And now this is a very significant and controversial piece of the Jesus movement, because you can see from this list of things that there are issues of deserving care, issues about justice, issues about authority, and though I didn't write it, dignity, and concerns here again about justice and about care, but yet there's also the reinforcing of bodily suffering. And that's not the only provocative piece. This is bodily suffering that's modeled after a late leader, someone who's departed, someone who's dead, but who continues in living relationship with that group beyond their death. So the relationship that a person has with another person after death is different for the religion that emerges out of the Jesus movement. So it's this element of resurrection and the idea of a body that lives beyond that is a slightly provocative piece. Now, the Greeks held that a few individuals had been resurrected to physical immortality, but there really wasn't an ancient Greek belief in a general resurrection of the dead, just the possibility of the immortality of the soul. And this is something that predates Christianity by 1,000 years. Once a body was destroyed, there wasn't really the possibility of returning to life. And for the Romans as well, and the Egyptians as well, this notion of a bodily resurrection is something that is rather innovative. Now, the idea of resurrection or a life after death within Judaism is also fairly new. It's only during the period of the Maccabean revolt, which is about 1.5 centuries before the time of Jesus, that the notion of life after death is going to be part of the Jewish theology. So early Christian authors are going to have to argue for resurrection beliefs in ways that answer to traditional Greek and Roman skepticism about a post-mortem physical continuity. So in terms of the New Testament and medical care, there are some very minor details, very minor, about medical care that stand in contradiction to one another. For example, we read here in 1 Timothy, no longer drink only water, but take a little wine for the sake of the stomach and your frequent ailments. And that's very different from this over here. Are any of you suffering? They should pray. Are any cheerful? They should sing songs of praise. Are any among you sick? Call for the elders of the church and have them pray over them, anointing them with oil in the name of the Lord. The prayer of the faith will save the sick, and the Lord will raise them up, and anyone who has committed sins will be forgiven. And these are two pretty different approaches towards the ill body. So we want to be very careful. This is my point. Be very careful as we go into these texts and know ahead of time that if you're looking for consistency when you're dealing with anyone's scriptures, whether they are Jewish scriptures or Christian scriptures or Muslim scriptures, you're not going to find consistency. So we need to be mindful of that. So as you read the passages assigned, the miracle passages that you're going to be reading in Mark were written between around 66 and 70 of the Common Era. It's during the time of the Judean revolt. Healing happens in these texts in confusion, not in spite of it. The healing passages, they reflect confusion about Jesus' identity and about Jesus' intentions. And notice that the healing that Jesus does is going to provoke suspicion and fear and animosity. And so these are things to consider. So when you're reading, I'm going to want you to think about the categories that you find in the biblical texts. And what do these categories teach you about how illness is understood in this particular context? The other thing I'm going to ask you to think about is selecting one patient from the Gospel of Mark account and identify their social location. Explain what their social location teaches you about how Jesus in the Gospel of Mark understands the distribution of care. By social location, I mean, who is this person? What is their gender? What do they have access to in their particular world? What details about them as a person can teach you about how Jesus understands distribution of care? Again, as always, if you have any questions, you can email me at isenbl@plu.edu. Thank you.